The treaty that ended the Spanish-American War in 1898 contained a crucial clause. The United States agreed to pay Spain $20 million in exchange for the Philippines. What followed was the beginning of the American colonial period in the islands, a period that would last until after the Second World War, when the Philippines finally achieved independence. At first, many Filipinos believed that the Americans had come as allies to support their struggle for freedom from Spain. For them, it seemed a chance at true independence. But the Americans viewed it differently. To President William McKinley and others, it was not about Filipino self-rule, but about opportunity. He claimed that America's role was to uplift, civilize, and Christianize the people of the islands. In August 1898, the United States established a military government in Manila. With this authority, they began constructing a system modeled after their own, with schools, courts, and local administrations. At the same time, the Philippine Revolutionary Government, which had taken shape during the Spanish-American War, was busy creating its own structure. They held elections and seated an assembly whose task was to draft a constitution. By January 1899, this constitution had been adopted and was scheduled to go into effect on the 21st of that month, officially establishing the First Philippine Republic. But just weeks earlier, on the 4th of January, the United States had issued its own proclamation. Since Spain had ceded the islands, America declared that military rule would extend across the entire archipelago. This statement struck directly at the legitimacy of the new republic. Emilio Aguinaldo, the president of the fledgling government, issued a firm response. He asserted that the Philippines was already independent and had the right to defend itself against foreign occupation. On the 4th of February 1899, open warfare erupted with an American assault on San Juan. A few months later, in June, Aguinaldo's government formally declared war on the United States. The Filipinos faced a nearly impossible fight. They were not equipped for modern warfare. Many did not even possess guns, relying instead on bows, arrows, and spears. When conventional battle proved hopeless, they shifted to guerrilla tactics. Their strategy was to wear down the enemy through constant raids and ambushes rather than to seek decisive victories. The Americans adapted quickly to counter this insurgency. They employed harsh methods familiar to internal colonial wars. Civilians were rounded up and confined to camps under the justification of separating them from guerrilla fighters. Conditions in these camps were poor. Supplies were scarce disease, spread rapidly, and many more Filipinos died there than in direct combat. By December 1900, the rebellion showed no signs of ending. General Arthur MacArthur declared martial law across the islands. Yet even as the war dragged on, another American effort was underway. A commission headed by William Howard Taft began designing a civil government. By offering positions within local administrations and civil services, the Americans hoped to lure leaders away from the resistance. In March 1901, Emilio Aguinaldo was captured. The blow was devastating for the revolutionaries. A month later, he swore allegiance to the United States and urged his followers to lay down arms. Some commanders, like Miguel Malvar and Vicente Lucban, kept fighting until 1902, while smaller groups carried on resistance into 1913. The cost of the war was staggering. The United States spent more in blood and treasure than it had in the Spanish-American War itself. For the Filipinos, the toll was catastrophic. At least 200,000 civilians perished from famine disease and the destruction left by scorched earth campaigns. American troops at times used brutal tactics to extract information from prisoners, while Filipino fighters retaliated with their own forms of cruelty. Once the fighting subsided, the Philippines was governed as a territory under what was called the Insular Government. Its stated purpose was to guide the islands toward eventual independence. In 1907, elections were held for a Philippine Assembly which served as the lower house of a bicameral legislature. The upper house remained in the hands of an American-appointed commission. Despite limited power, the Assembly passed yearly resolutions demanding independence. A major step came in 1916 with the Philippine Autonomy Act, more commonly called the Jones Law. This replaced the appointed commission with an elected Senate, and for the first time declared in law that America's ultimate goal was independence for the islands, though it offered no timeline. World War I interrupted any momentum, but after the conflict, Filipino leaders renewed their appeals. President Woodrow Wilson publicly stated in his final address in 1921 that the Philippines was ready for independence. However, his successors disagreed. Warren Harding sent a commission to investigate, and it returned a report claiming the islands were not yet prepared, a conclusion hotly disputed by many. The issue lingered until 1933, when the U.S. Congress finally passed the Philippine Independence Act. This law provided a timetable. The Philippines would draft a constitution, establish a commonwealth, and after 10 years become fully independent on the 4th of July following the decade mark. The new constitution went into effect in November 1935, starting the countdown to July 1946. The Commonwealth government set out ambitious plans, but the Great Depression and growing instability in Asia limited what could be achieved. Japan's aggression in China and its alliance with Germany cast a long shadow. These fears proved justified. On December 7, 1941, Japan attacked Pearl Harbor and at the same time launched an assault on the Philippines. The islands were quickly drawn into World War II. General Douglas MacArthur, son of Arthur MacArthur, who had once governed the Philippines, commanded American forces. Manila was declared an open city to avoid destruction, but it fell to Japan in January 1942. The Philippine President Manuel Quezon and Vice President Sergio Osmeña escaped with MacArthur to the United States, where they established a government. In exile, Japan set up a puppet regime known as the Philippine Executive Commission. Some Filipinos believed they might gain independence through collaboration with the Japanese, but the majority resisted fiercely. The initial Japanese invasion left American aircraft destroyed on the ground. Filipino and American forces retreated to the Bataan Peninsula and Corregidor Island, where they were eventually forced to surrender. What followed became infamous as the Bataan Death March. 75,000 prisoners were forced to march over 60 miles with almost no food, water, or medical care. Thousands perished along the way. The occupation was brutal. Forced labor was widespread. Women and girls were enslaved as so-called comfort women for Japanese soldiers. These atrocities fueled an underground resistance that grew throughout the war. By the end, nearly 300,000 Filipinos were directly engaged in guerrilla activity, with countless others providing support. In October 1944, General MacArthur returned with American forces. By then, guerrillas had severely weakened Japanese control and provided crucial intelligence. The decisive moment came at the Battle of Leyte Gulf from October 23rd to 26th. This battle remains the largest naval engagement in history. Admiral William Halsey commanded the American fleet against Japanese forces. Through a series of miscalculations and fierce American resistance, the Japanese were defeated, losing many ships, including the super battleship Musashi. The battle marked the decline of Japan's naval power. The liberation of the Philippines was bloody. Manila was retaken in February 1945 after a month of savage street-by-street combat. Civilians were trapped in the crossfire and tens of thousands were killed. Fighting continued across the islands until Japan's final surrender in September 1945. Only months later, in July 1946, the long-awaited moment arrived. After decades of struggle, war, occupation, and sacrifice, the Philippines was granted full independence. The ceremony was held with great celebration, as the new republic finally took its place among the free nations of the world. The story of the Philippines from the end of the Spanish American War to independence is one of resilience and hardship. It is the tale of a people determined to achieve self-rule despite being caught between empires. The Filipinos endured not only the cruelty of war, but also the betrayals of politics and the devastations of foreign domination. Yet, through perseverance, they reached the goal they had dreamed of since the first revolution against Spain.